everybody. Happy Monday. So, Stephanie, we talked a little bit about Biden's D-Day speech very briefly last week.
Yep.
And it did indeed turn out to be yet another embarrassing world stage moment where his senile and dementia-induced actions resulted in people actually questioning whether he shit his pants on stage again.
Again is the key the
Again.
key point.
Yeah. Did it happen?
So
I don't know.
embarrassing.
But
Gosh.
the fact that people are even talking about it is all you need to know. So anyway, while Biden was in France, he met with Zelensky and shocking, we're sending another aid package to Ukraine. So this time it's 225 million and as expected, Biden repeated his pledge to support the continued destruction of Ukraine by prolonging this never-ending conflict. He told Zelensky, "I'm not going to walk away from you and we're still completely in thoroughly." And get this, Stephanie, he fucking apologized to Zelensky for the delay in giving him more money and blamed it on Republicans. So I want to play this clip from the press conference.
Apologize for those weeks of not knowing what's going to happen in terms of funding, because we had trouble getting the bill that we had to pass that had the money in it from some of our very conservative members who were holding it up. But we got it done finally, and since then, including today, I've announced 6 packages of significant funding. Today, I'm also signing an additional package for $225 million to help you reconstruct the electric grid. But once we got the national security bill passed, that was a political issue. We were able to get it all done. And the way you stood and holding on in Kharkiv, and you're proving once again the people in Ukraine cannot and will never be overtaken. And I assure you, the United States is going to stand with you. I've said that all during this debate, and I continue to say it. The United States is standing with you. You are the bulwark against the aggression that's taking place. We have an obligation to be there. And so I'm looking forward to having a detailed discussion with you about where we go from here.
Mumble, 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 mumble. Like,
Unbelievable. It reminds me of when you're in the corporate world and you did something, you weren't supposed to do, or your numbers don't look good and you're talking to the CEO and you're ashamed of yourself and you're trying to just get out of it.
Yes. If you see the clip, it's so fucking cringe. It's so clear that Biden's groveling. He's sitting there curled up in his little old man posture and he's staring down at his lap. And Zelensky is sitting there with his legs spread open in this very dominant male position. And he's got his hand on his chin and he's just watching Biden. And he's just like, Grandpa, go back to the basement. Seriously. And then Zelensky's response is to say, yeah, it's important that you stay with us. Stephanie, who the fuck is in charge here? Definitely not Biden. Can we look any more weak on the world stage?
Well, that's just it. Other leaders are looking at this and probably thinking, what can we do to take advantage of this situation right now? I mean, it's embarrassing and it's dangerous.
Yeah, it's just so disturbing. And I want to point out one of the things he said is that some of this money is going to Ukraine to rebuild their electrical grid. Now, of course, this also includes more munitions, artillery, and air defense systems. But I'm going to veer off topic here for a minute because the whole electrical grid thing, I just want to point out, talking about America now, that despite the fact that Biden has spent $7.5 billion in federal funding for these electric vehicle charging stations across the country, remember, this is all part of his beloved yet entire failure infrastructure bill. Stephanie, I want you to take a guess on how many EV stations have been built nationwide.
0. I don't know. Wasn't it 0 last time we did an episode on it?
Well, you're close because it's 7 or 8 now.
Oh,
God. and I'm not leaving off zeros. This isn't me reading it and fucking up what I'm saying. $7.5 billion worth of taxpayer money has resulted in less than 10 EV charging stations nationwide. So where has the money gone? Like, nobody knows. Not even Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, who's supposed to be in charge of this project, along with our equally useless DOE Secretary Jennifer Granholm. So Buttigieg recently went on Face the Nation, and he was asked where the taxpayer $7.5 billion investment has gone and why it's taking so long to build these chargers. So, as with everyone in the Biden admin, he was unable to give any kind of clear answer. And here's what he said, quote, "In order to do a charger, it's more than just plunking a small device into the ground. There is utility work. And there is also, this is really a new category of federal investment," end quote. And then he admitted that most of the charging infrastructure right now is being provided by the private sector. Like, Stephanie, 7.5 billion in taxpayer money for 8 charging stations worth of utility work that's not even being done by our government, but instead by the private sector.
Yeah. And meanwhile, we have like all of these derailments and bridges down and explosions, which there's been more. I've like literally lost track. We probably need to do an episode on that. And can I just point out how pissed off I am that they're rebuilding the Ukrainian grid when, remember, we did like a whole episode on how important it is for us to rebuild our grid? Because
Yep.
if we don't, then an EMP attack would like wipe out American civilization. But no, he can do that for Ukraine, but not for his own country. Sorry, had to throw that in there.
No, you're right. And like, meanwhile, you've got lesser developed countries like Ethiopia, who has installed charging stations in their country with no problem. I was
What?
reading, yeah,
Aren't they
I
the
was,
ones that are always like hungry and don't have food?
well, according to the Daily Caller, Ethiopia's Ministry of Transport and Logistics installed 60 charging stations in the nation's capital recently, and they have plans to install 1,000 more in different cities across the country. But the United States, the most advanced nation in the world, has only managed to install 7 or 8 charging stations, which, by the way, nobody fucking wants them anyway because nobody wants to drive electric vehicles. And since I'm on the topic of this $1.2 trillion overall infrastructure bill that Biden introduced, as a reminder, this was back in 2021, right? And he's been bragging about this bill ever since. It's what he brings up every time he gives a speech about how his administration is transforming America's roads and bridges and railways and highways. And it's the largest infrastructure plan since President Eisenhower's interstate system. And Buttigieg says it's the most meaningful investment in infrastructure that we've ever seen in this country. And what's been happening with it, Stephanie? So let me share something with you. With this whole plan, the Biden admin gave $454 billion for 56,000 projects across the country. And out of the 10 most significant bridge and highway projects, how many have been completed? Take a guess.
0?
Correct.
That's my answer for everything.
There is only one that has even broken ground on construction, and that's a $1.6 billion Penn Station project. There's 2 other major projects in Connecticut and Maryland that aren't slated to be completed before 2029 at the earliest. And the majority of these thousands of projects haven't even made it past the environmental impact study phase of development. This is literally billions of dollars allocated for projects where nothing has been done. And on top of that, we signed all of these agreements. The Federal Highway Administration has legally binding agreements that they signed. And as a result of Biden inflation, these contracts have lost $47 billion of their buying power since they were signed in the third quarter of 2023 between July and September. So not only are projects not being completed, but we're losing billions of our tax dollars in the process. So I don't mean to go off on a tangent here, but I just want everyone to know that this is how your tax dollars are hard at work for the Biden admin.
And I just want to put this out there. If anyone wants to do this, maybe we'll do an episode on this, but I would love to research what companies are taking on these jobs and getting funding, because I guarantee that all roads lead back to Hunter Biden and or Obama. I'm just going to say, I don't know that. Someone should research it. We need to look into that.
I think that someone might be us.
Yep.
Okay, but let me get back to Ukraine. So, like, clearly we are just continuing to poke and prod the bear at this point, right? We keep taking steps against Russia that is essentially provoking World War III. And remember last week I mentioned how Biden authorized Ukraine's military to use American weapons to strike military targets in Russia, but he told Zelensky, like, don't use them directly on Moscow or the Kremlin. Stephanie, what do you bet there's going to be some kind of accidental, like, oopsie strike on Moscow?
Oh, 100%. And just imagine if Russia was supplying weapons to, like, let's just say Iran to use on the United States, but then said, oh, don't worry, they won't hit DC. Like, I'm sorry. No, no one's going to be okay with that. This is like absolutely a move to escalate the conflict. I think it's very purposeful. And supposedly, the weapons can only be used in defense and only right along the Russian border. But as you said, like, it's just asking for an oopsie moment, which we know is going to happen. So I want to play a clip because Trump did another interview on June 6th, and it's with Dr. Phil. Before you judge it, listen to the clip because I heard Dr. Phil and I'm like, but anyhow, Dr. Phil asks, like, what are you going to do if you inherit a situation where American weapons are being used to strike Russia? And then Dr. Phil, like, pulls out an actual map and lays out all the places that the Chinese government has bought up farmland in the United States. And guess what? They're all surrounding military bases. So
which we've been saying for the last 2 years.
And that's why I was like, oh my gosh, like, at least now, like, Trump is confirming it. And hopefully with this interview, more people will wake up and see what's been happening, like, right in front of our noses the whole time. So listen to this.
The game. I know them all. I know many more than that. And our country's in tremendous danger of World War III. Our country's, you look at what's going on with Ukraine now, you see what's happening, where they're talking about nuclear. They're bringing out the N-word, as I say. And they're talking about nuclear weapons, and they're talking about things that were never, in my White House, nobody ever uttered the word nuclear. Nuclear is a very bad word because of the power of weaponry. And we have a man that should not be dealing, and we're going to end up in a nuclear war. We're going to end up in World War III with this guy. And if the 5 months is a long time. We have 5 months to go before the election. Now it's even a little bit less. It's getting to be very close. Remember, you have early voting in September 22nd. Pennsylvania goes September 22nd. So it's really less, quite a bit less. But I really believe it's a very dangerous time because I think they're making moves. They love him as our president. They don't respect him. They think he's weak and incompetent. Now, one thing I'll say, he's surrounded by a lot of fascists and communists, but a lot of fascists. And they're young and they're smart. And that's who's running our country.
Well, let me ask you something then. Let's assume that you inherit a situation where American bombs are being used inside of Russia. Let's assume that you inherit that. We could wind up with World War III if we're not there already and it just hasn't been labeled yet.
We've never been so close to World War III as we are right now.
Right. There could be 100,000 or more potential terrorists on American soil right now today, given what's happened at the southern border.
Correct.
And we do have Venezuela, Congo, others that are emptying their prisons of their most dangerous criminals with one caveat: we'll let you out, but you go to the United States.
I believe every country is doing it.
Yeah. And
by the way, if you were the head of a country, you'd be the first one to do it. I know you. You'd say, what? Let's get rid of these. You know the money they save and the danger they save?
And look at this map. That I did a show about this. The red is where Chinese government has funded buying major farmland.
Yeah.
And then superimposed on that are some of our most strategic military bases.
Yeah.
And you can see there's
surrounding.
there's Dugway Proving Ground. That's military equipment, biological, chemical weapons. They're surrounding it. Utah Test Training Range, the largest supersonic authorized restricted airspace in the United States. Whiteman Air Force Base, B-2 Spirit Stealth Bomber Base, missile drone operations, MQ-9 Reaper, Global Strike Command 3, Air Force entire Bomber Force Nuclear Command, Control, and Communications. Fort Liberty, Airborne Special Operations Forces, Rapid Deployment. We've allowed them to come in and buy up agricultural land, wind farms, no wind, no blades on some of the towers, but they're surrounding our military bases.
Right.
We've allowed that to take place. You may come in and inherit all of this, and it may get worse over the next 5 months.
It will.
What are you going to do about that?
Oh, first of all, you mentioned a thing, Fort Liberty. Used to be Fort Bragg. We won world wars from Fort Bragg.
Yes.
And they changed the name. And I don't even want to say that they spent $37 million in doing it, because that's not the most important thing, but that's a lot of money. You know,
Pretty just
Okay, the clip it cut off at that point, but he goes on to say, Trump goes on to say that he thinks all these military age Chinese citizens that have crossed our border could be building a Chinese military inside of the US. And Tara, you and I have been talking about this for years now, but hearing Trump say it, it's like, okay, someone's recognizing this and is saying it's not just a possibility, it's very likely. And then that map scared the hell out of me, because they're literally surrounding all of these bases, which includes pretty much every area in Florida north of me. It includes various points in Texas, but all over the country. And to think that this administration has allowed this to happen is unfathomable. Like, how stupid. And it goes back to either you have to be completely incompetent or completely compromised. And I think as much as he's incompetent, I think he's compromised. Like, it's got to be that. So anyhow, not only do we have to worry about Russia, obviously, and now Iran with the whole conflict with Israel, and the other 20 million illegals that have crossed the border, but now China very well is surrounding our biggest military bases right here inside of the United States. What the fuck?
Yeah, okay. I'm going to add to this, Stephanie. So, you know how Biden recently gave this executive order last week to stop processing asylum claims when migrant encounters hit 2,500 per day for 7 consecutive days at the border?
Yeah.
Well, there's apparently an exemption to this order, and I'm going to read you what it states. It says, quote, single adults and family units who are very hard to remove, such as countries which do not permit charter repatriation flights, may be considered for processing of expedited removal or placed into Section 240 removal proceedings, end quote. So, what are Section 240 removal proceedings? Well, as I was reading in the New York Post, according to Border Patrol, this means that migrants are being released into the country with a court date and allowed to pursue asylum, which, as we know, typically takes years to resolve if they even show up. And a DHS official told the Post that Biden's new restrictions are, quote, all bullshit, end quote. And the official said, migrants who can't be deported, are not included in the 2,500 number. The language was ambiguous for a reason, end quote. So if you think illegal border crossings are slowing down, think again. This article from the Post that came out on Friday said Border Patrol sources informed them that approximately 10,000 migrants were in Border Patrol custody on Thursday, and 4,000 of those had been apprehended on Wednesday alone. And Stephanie, what's one of the countries that refuses to accept deportations? China.
I just heard about that. Oh.
Yes. And how many illegal Chinese migrants have been arrested by Border Patrol so far in fiscal year 2024? Over 27,000. And that's just the number that have been arrested, not counting the untold numbers that evade law enforcement and are in the country illegally that nobody knows about. So how many of these 27,000 illegal Chinese migrants have been sent back to China. According to ICE, our immigration, 89 migrants have been sent back
What
out
a
of
joke.
27,000. Yeah. And in 2023, there were 24,000 Chinese migrants who were caught illegally entering the country. And out of those, 285 were sent back. And as a side note, how Dr. Phil or Trump, one of the two, brought up Venezuela and those immigrants. Well, Venezuela stopped accepting deportation flights from us back in February. And Border Patrol encountered over 200,000 illegal Venezuelan migrants in 2023. And so far in 2024, according to federal data, we're already at 124,000 Venezuelans that have been arrested. And I've
Because
talked
they're
about
emptying their prisons. They
exactly.
are prisoners. Yeah.
Yes. And we've talked about this before, how migrants will ditch their IDs before they come over the border. We have no fucking clue who they are when they show up. And according to Border Patrol, when they can't identify whoever this person is, and they come from a country that's uncooperative in accepting deportations, and we have no fucking idea who they are or what their criminal history is, oh, well, they just get to stay in the country because we can't send them back. So yeah, what you just said is very alarming in light of combining this information. It's insane.
And the whole thing with the illegal migrants that are Chinese citizens, this is not something that's like always been. When you look
No.
at the increase, it has increased like dramatically, like thousands of percentage points, I think, just in the past few years. So it's like, why? Why all of a sudden would they be coming? Well, because we have a weak president and they need to fill those military bases that they're building on US soil.
Yeah, I would not doubt that for a second. And okay, I have to bring up some other things that we need to be paying attention to regarding global politics. And I got to go back to Ukraine because a lot of this has to do with Ukraine. But there's two major things happening this month. We've got the G7 summit that is starting this Thursday in Italy. And of course, the main topic is going to be continuing unwavering support for Ukraine. And KJP recently gave a press statement where she said the G7 leaders are going to talk about how to advance their efforts to use immobilized Russian assets to help Ukraine while continuing to impose useless sanctions on Russia and other countries who support Russia's war effort. Japan, which is part of the G7, announced on Saturday that they're signing an agreement pledging 10 years of support for Ukraine that will include Japan responding to calls for assistance within 24 hours of any new Russian invasion. And Stephanie, the G7 leaders are going to be discussing, according to KJP, quote, how to promote economic security and resilience, including by addressing harmful overcapacity, end quote. Stephanie, what do you think harmful overcapacity means?
I would love to know their definition of it because I can guarantee it's different than mine.
Yeah. And then, of course, they're going to be talking about Biden's comprehensive deal for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and creating credible pathways towards peace with the two-state solution. Again, where's that going to go? Like, who the fuck knows? But the second thing that's happening is there's an upcoming global peace summit in Switzerland the following week. So, what is the Global Peace Summit? Well, it's brand new. This is its inaugural year. And this summit is basically a push for Ukraine to become part of NATO. And the meeting is being spearheaded by none other than Zelensky. So there's going to be delegates from 100 countries coming together to discuss a, quote, diplomatic path forward for the war in Ukraine. And as I mentioned last week, France is about to send military trainers to Ukraine, which is clearly a hint that we're getting closer to NATO becoming involved in the war. And at the last minute last week, France uninvited Russian officials from the D-Day commemorations, which is unheard of because even back when Russia was annexing Crimea, Putin still attended the Normandy anniversary events, and relations were bad with the US back then. So this is like a huge slap in the face, or it was. And I was reading in this publication called Responsible Statecraft that Zelensky is pushing this 10-point peace plan. And part of the plan is demanding that Russian troops be expelled from Ukraine and top Kremlin officials be prosecuted. And I don't know about you, Stephanie, but I don't foresee Putin agreeing to this.
No. I mean, it's the whole thing's ridiculous. It's just like you said earlier, poking the bear.
Yeah, and interestingly, Biden will not be attending the Peace Summit because he has a high dollar celebrity fundraising event in Los Angeles with Obama, George Clooney, and Julia Roberts. So guess who he's sending in his place? Fucking Kamala and Jake Sullivan, which Zelensky has hinted he's not too pleased about because he wants Biden to be there. Now, I want to bring up a few key issues here because one of the things this article pointed out is that Switzerland is kind of straying from their neutrality. They're on board with Western sanctions against Russia. Switzerland has banned Russian planes from flying over Swiss territory. So they're no longer impartial the way they used to be. And Putin has basically rejected the idea of Switzerland as a mediator of peace for this summit. And the most obvious issue here is that Russia is not invited to the peace summit. So reportedly, Zelensky said the Kremlin representatives could eventually join negotiations, maybe in future summits, but only on Kiev's terms. And I want to point out that since Russia's not invited, China's decided not to attend the summit. Stephanie, how do you have a peace summit where the main country involved in the conflict isn't invited to be part of the negotiations? Like, even the Swiss foreign ministry said that a peace process is unthinkable without Russia involved. Like, I don't think this is going to be a peace summit. It's going to be an escalation of NATO against Russia.
It sounds like a plan to initiate World War III. I mean, absolutely, it's not going to be a peace summit. They're just calling it that because they know they can put that out in the news then. So people think, oh, see, they're trying to make a peace deal. No, they're not. They're trying to initiate World War III, and they're going to the place where all the elites are from, where all the elites live. And it sounds like they want Putin to think that as well. Like they want to let him know. And, you know, they'll probably put together some completely unreasonable quote unquote peace deal. And then when he doesn't agree, then, you know, they're going to try to put the blame on him, saying, oh, he's the one escalating things. He doesn't want peace. And like, is it just me, or do you think that they're going to try and escalate the situation as much as possible between now and the election? I think
Absolutely.
yeah, it's
And
very
that way,
purposeful.
that way the United States can do exactly what Zelensky has done with Ukraine and not have a fucking election.
Right. Yeah. So I came across a Newsmax article and it said that I guess Putin just had a panel discussion at the International Economic Summit in St. Petersburg. And he said that Russia has more tactical nuclear weapons than there are on the entire European continent, even if the US brings theirs over. And he went on to say, quote, Europe does not have a developed early warning system. In this sense, they are more or less defenseless, end quote. And if that's not enough, 4 Russian warships, including a nuclear-powered submarine, are arriving in Havana this week for military exercises. And Cuba's foreign ministry, you know, issued this news release saying, oh, there's nothing to worry about because they're not going to actually have nuclear weapons on them. And their presence, quote, does not represent a threat to the region, end quote. Okay, Putin didn't make that very clear, first of all. And second of all, like, I don't like the thought of Russian warships 50 miles off the coast where I live. Like, this is alarming, and it's him, you know, showing them and getting things in place. I think because of this whole peace summit, you know, I think that probably pushed him to do this. Like, okay, you're not going to invite me. Like, I'm going to get everything set up. So anyhow, there's a CBS News article I found that points out that this isn't just some routine thing, having warships in Cuba. This is in response to the U.S. continued support for Ukraine and, again, the peace summit. And not to get like too off topic, but the censorship, Tara, is unreal. Like, I went to do internet searches for news articles. 0 options come up for anything on the right, anything even close to the right or moderate. And when I go to like the news search function, only one article pops up. And this has happened all week with various topics. And like previously, I would get pages and pages and pages of results. Well, no, now the internet search engines are only pushing like one result, and that is obviously propaganda. And like none of this stuff we're talking about today would be happening if Trump was president. It didn't happen when he was president because Putin wouldn't dare. And so here we are, and we have to hear about this like in passing on the news because there's no word from Biden on it, no stern warning about Russian warships being right off the coast because he's weak. He's weak and he doesn't care. And he probably doesn't even know it's happening because he doesn't even know where he is half the time.
Yeah. And what's also not normal is look at all the countries in Europe right now, and even the United States, that are considering bringing back the draft. Why would
Yeah,
they be doing this unless we're preparing for an escalation of conflict leading us into another war? I mean,
right.
we're walking such a fine line here. We continue to send weapons and money to Ukraine. Biden apologizes and grovels to Zelensky. And every fucking time he speaks about Ukraine, he talks about how we are in it to the end. But then a few weeks ago, Biden did an interview with Time magazine where he said he doesn't support Ukraine joining NATO right now. And he said, quote, I am not prepared to support the NATOization of Ukraine, end quote, and said that he had witnessed significant corruption when he made trips to Ukraine during the Obama administration. So we're escalating this conflict. At the same time, Biden is giving contradictory statements about Ukraine joining NATO, but we're in it with you and we're just going to keep fucking sending money forever. Like,
Okay, real quick, I don't want to get off on like a tangent, but I just want to point something out that is coming to mind. So we know that Hunter Biden, his whole court case is going on right now where they admitted, in court that that is his laptop. Now all of a sudden, Biden is admitting there's all this corruption in Ukraine. Could it be because that was his whole excuse for firing the guy that was looking into Burisma, and he knows this is all going to come up again before the election in court? And so now all of a sudden he's like saying, oh, no, 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 they're corrupt, even though he's been like sending billions of dollars their way.
yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. Like, I don't think he even knows what comes out of his mouth, like what
I
he
don't
is
even
and
think
is
he
not
knows what's
supposed
going
to
on.
say. Yeah, not at all. And so, okay, I'm going to switch gears here again because I want to bring up something else that happened quietly last week. And this is about the United Nations and the World Health Organization. So, the 77th World Health Assembly was in Switzerland last week. And thankfully, you know how we've been talking about this global pandemic treaty they've been pushing?
Yep.
Well, it didn't make it through the voting process. And the only reason is because they couldn't agree on the wording. So, yay, except not yay, because this isn't necessarily a win. What they did instead was they adopted a package of amendments to the international health regulations, and they did it in a way that was really fucking shady because it was done by consensus and not by an actual vote. So last Saturday, the WHO put out a statement that the WHA and its 194 member countries, quote, agreed on a package of critical amendments to the International Health Regulations 2005 IHR and made concrete commitments to completing negotiations on a global pandemic agreement within a year at the latest, end quote. So critics are questioning, is this even legal? But Stephanie, is anything these fucking people have been doing legal? Like,
No.
the word legal means nothing to the elites running the show. And I was reading an article in The Blaze that was saying, even though the WHO is insinuating they have this consent, there's a group called the Sovereignty Coalition, which said only 30% of member states were even present and a roll call vote was not conducted. So one of the amendments that they adopted is a new definition for pandemic emergency. So according to AP News, a pandemic emergency will now be defined as a communicable disease that has a wide geographical spread or a high risk one and has exceeded or can exceed the ability of national health systems to respond. It's also defined as an outbreak that has or could cause substantial economic or social disruption and requires quick international action. Stephanie, is that fucking like vague and open to interpretation, or is it just me?
It's open to hypotheticals. There could be hypothetically something that could spread, and we can basically put everyone under lockdown or put them into, camps. This is like basically setting things up for them to legally do what Hitler did. That's the way I'm looking at this.
Yeah, and it's not just a health emergency because they said an outbreak that could cause substantial economic or social disruption that requires quick international action. Like, that could be fucking anything, right?
Like people revolting because they don't want World War III.
Right, exactly. So the whole thing, like, to me, this is very disturbing. And then they have other amendments, like they're going to do this new equity-driven wealth redistribution of relevant health products from countries that have more money to countries that don't have money. They're creating this whole new bureaucracy to like oversee how all this takes place. And they're creating authorities for member countries to improve coordination of implementing these regulations within and among countries. Like, the language in this is very alarming to me, and it should be alarming to fucking everybody. There is a biochemist, American biochemist named Dr. Robert Malone. And on Monday, he basically said that he said, quote, these hastily approved IHR amendments consolidate virtually unchecked authority and power of the general director to declare public health emergencies and pandemics as he or she may choose to define them, and thereby trigger and guide allocation of global resources, as well as a wide range of public health actions and guidance, end quote. The article also talked about the Kaiser Family Foundation, which reported that the Biden admin, of course, was actively engaged in all of these amendment negotiations, even though Republican lawmakers were urging Biden that by doing this, it would obviously increase the WHO's health emergency powers and constitute intolerable infringements upon U.S. sovereignty. And if it's approved at the WHA, these revisions don't require any further congressional approval or ratification in the United States.
And can I just point out the one president that was very outspoken and against this was shot in the head? Just going to throw that out there so everyone remembers.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, this is terrifying. And this is what happens when you have a weak, compromised leader. And like, this is why everyone needs to get out and vote for Trump. Because I mean, honestly, like none of this would be happening if he was still president. None of it. I don't care what country, it would not be happening. So it's like, we need to shout it from the rooftops. We need to make sure people are paying attention to like what's going on here, because there is a lot at risk. And I want everyone to listen to Wednesday's episode, because we're going to be talking a lot about Switzerland and organizations like the WHO and the UN that are all situated there in Geneva. And it's going to blow your freaking mind, and everyone needs to be paying attention to this. So we'll see everyone back here on Wednesday. Thanks for tuning in. I know it was a long episode, but holy shit, we need to pay attention. All right, we'll see you guys back here. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.